Hello all, welcome back to another lesson with Rivera Fine Art Studios. Today I wanted to talk about sight size and comparative measuring. Although both are helpful techniques for gauging width to height ratios, they are not foolproof. Subtle alterations occur when applying construction lines, and even if a line is off by a few millimeters, it can change the proportions of your subject. At the end of the day, you need to be able to rely on your eye. In my own work, I myself use measuring to check my initial judgments after I apply my big shapes, and I continue to use it periodically throughout the process to refine my details. As a student, I relied on measuring much more than I do now. Over the years, I have developed my eye to see my proportions more accurately, so measuring is simply a tool to double-check my assessments rather than a necessity. However, when learning how to draw, it can be extremely valuable, especially if proportion is something you struggle with. As you practice the methods, you too will develop your perceptions. Eventually, you will learn how to recognize accurate proportions, and measuring will become just a way of verifying your judgments. With that said, I had to make some adjustments on my vase drawing, as a few of my construction lines weren't in the exact position that they should have been. This can also occur if a line that is supposed to be straight is at a slight angle. I believe this was my issue. Because I was able to recognize this, I was able to make the necessary adjustments pretty easily. I can now remeasure the proportions of my vase to be sure that my shapes are accurate before I continue on. So the first thing I want to do is measure the width proportion on the vase itself and then compare that to the height. I have one that takes me almost to the middle of the vase. If I bring that up, I have two. So that follows my initial measurement, and let me just double check on my drawing. So once again, I align my thumb with the left side and the point of the pencil with the right. That's one width. Take that unit of measurement, turn it vertically. I have one, which takes me right about to the middle of the vase in my drawing, which is the same as on the actual vase. And if I bring it up to that point, I have two. All looks good. Now I will begin shading. For this project, I'm going to use my H pencils for my lightest value. And you'll notice here that I've sharpened these up to a very fine point. I actually sharpen these using a razor blade, and then I finish them off on a piece of sandpaper to create a razor sharp point. This will be really helpful when I'm working out details, when I want to create sharper edges, such as the transitions in here between my planes. Another reason why I will be using the H pencils is because I have a very subtle value range in here. If I look at this vase, most of my values fall between a pure white and a mid-tone. There's really not many distinctive darks. The only place where I might have a distinctive dark would be this cast shadow right under the vase. So the H pencils, because they are so hard, it allows me to create a very subtle gradation within that close range of values between the white and the mid-tone. If you look at my video where I shaded the sphere, in the sight size video, I used a tortillon, but today I won't actually be using a tortillon. I'll just be using the H pencils and probably maybe a B or possibly a 2B for my darker areas. I won't really need to go much darker than a 2B. Okay, and if you haven't seen that video, here's just a value scale to kind of show the range that I used in that drawing. So in that drawing, I went from the white of the paper down to my darker 4B. Here, I will be using probably, I won't really be going much darker than this value here, which is created with the 2B. And the lighter values, here I use just a tortillon. The H pencils will create values that are similar to this. So it's going to take more time to shade that way. It's not as fast as using a tortillon, but it's definitely well worth the effort because it will allow me to create, it will give me more control over creating those light values. Okay, so without any further ado, I am going to start this drawing, and once again, I will do a time lapse, so you'll be able to see it progress very quickly. and I will put notes up to show you when I'm switching pencils. The approach to this is going to be fairly similar to my previous demo of the sphere, in that I'm going to start with my darks. I'm going to start just blocking those shadows in, and then I will gradually continue working my gradations into the drawing. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and get started. I'm starting now with my lightest pencil, my 2H, and I'm just blocking in a general value for the shadow, for the darkest shadow that I see on the object. So I've sped forward here, and now I am looking for some variation within that shadow shape. So I see a little bit of a light shape in there, which I'm just very lightly drawing out with the 2H pencil. And I'm just making a little adjustment right now on the edge of the vase. It's a little bit more of a broad curve. Now I am filling that in, trying to hide that extra line that I just drew by shading over it. Again, still using the 2H pencil, working my way into some of the transitions of the shadow on the upper part of the vase. So just very, very light marks with the 2H pencil, trying to create an even value tone, just continuing to refine. So it's all about refinement, you know, getting the initial shape blocked in, the initial value, and then just adding transitions as you go. Okay, so here I'm switching to my B pencil. Right where those two planes come together, it gets a little bit darker, so I'm adding that darker contrast with the B pencil. And just carefully laying that in. Not going too much darker, but it is enough to show the contrast. And I'm just working my way up the edge. And my guess is that I won't really need to go with a pencil any darker than the B. So I don't even think I'm going to need to use my 2B, because that gives me quite a bit of contrast. Now I'm switching back to my 2H pencil, and I'm filling in the next plane at a pretty light value. So what I typically will do here is just kind of fill this in as a general value and then work the transition back into it. Using the side of the pencil to get a more even, softer touch, makes the value a little bit more even. And I have a transition right here. I have a light spot. So I'm just transitioning that value into the white of the paper. And now I'm going back once again with the 2H pencil and creating that darker transition. So again, right along the seam where those two planes come together, it's a little bit darker. I'm just rubbing my eraser over that line to lighten it a little bit. So if I go too dark, it's easy to correct with the eraser. And just continuing to refine my transitions. So you'll notice here, as I do this, I'm moving in a slightly different direction. Now I'm going up and down as opposed to diagonal. What that does is that allows me to sort of follow the direction of the plane, and it's just very appealing when shading to work that way, softening that edge a little bit. And as I had said before, really this is all a matter of building up the values. So start light and work dark. Just lightening this line here with my kneaded eraser once again, and going for my next value, which is still using the 2H pencil. This is a very, very light value. So I'm barely applying any pressure. I'm again using the side of the pencil. I'm not using the point. I don't want any scratchy lines. So the side will help me to, using the side of the pencil will help me to avoid that. And I'm just filling in that light value. So whenever you're drawing something, even a white object, you want to look at for values. It may be very, very light, but rarely will something just be a pure white. So try to always find that little bit of value. Okay, so as I am finishing this drawing up, I'm in the final stages, I am just kind of going over my areas of value one more time using a slightly darker pencil. So I'm sort of reapplying my value and slightly darkening it as I do that. I'm noticing here that this shadow was just a little bit too light, so I'm taking my B pencil and I am just going over it very lightly to give it a little bit more darkness. And as I am doing that, I am shading in the direction of the plane. I'm almost creating little hatch marks, letting them kind of run together, so I'm not cross-hatching in the strict sense of the term, but I do a lot of pen and ink drawings, and I have worked with cross-hatching and cross-contour, so I apply some of that to my shading technique. It just gives a little bit of texture. This type of method works really well when shading a portrait, as the shading can sort of simulate the texture of skin and pores. Okay, so that pretty much sums it up. That concludes part 2 of comparative measuring. If I were to continue this drawing, I would continue to work value tones in the background, particularly along my light side to create more contrast here and make that light pop out. Also, it would help to eliminate the lines, so I would look more for those tonal contrasts. But overall, I hope that it gave you a clear idea of how comparative measuring can be used in the drawing process. And I'm just continuing to tinker with this. I'm making a few little adjustments as I talk here. Just a few quick reminders of some things that can help when you're working on your values. Squinting is always very important. At any stage of the drawing, especially at the beginning, but even as I work on some of these areas one more time, when I squint, I see that they could be perhaps a little bit darker. So squinting is very helpful. The pencils, one more time, were, for the most part, my 2H I used. I actually did use 4H at one point in these very, very light areas. And that, once again, just gives great control over that subtle value range. And I will just bring the camera in a little bit closer so that one more time you can kind of see how I built those values up. So, for the most part, the initial values were laid in with the 2H pencil. So looking at this area here, the initial layer was 2H. And then I came over top of that with some darks. So here's where I used the B pencil, and I actually moved my strokes in a different direction, following the plane. That was pretty much my process throughout this whole drawing. I started light and then worked darks over the light. So to create those really subtle transitions, I just worked my darker graphite over the lighter graphite. Now, the advantage to this over using a tortillon is the control. A tortillon is much faster. If I had done this with a tortillon, I probably could have done it in about an hour. This particular drawing took about 3.5 hours just with the labor-intensive layering of value tone. But I have a much more polished result. I have much more control over the final values, and that is really what I was going for with this demo. So I hope you enjoyed. With the next demo, stay tuned. Next week I'm going to attempt drawing a skull, and I'm actually going to use a combination of a few of the different techniques that I've gone over thus far. So look out for that video, and in the meantime, enjoy drawing and painting.